to this webinar on barriers and fears preventing success. We've been wanting to focus on this subject for a while now, as it's so important for making progress, not just in our careers, but also in our day-to-day lives. There are all kinds of obstacles in life, some are put in place by others, and some we put in front of ourselves. This live stream is part of our leadership series, but is really applicable to anyone who wants to make progress, either within a business structure or perhaps starting or expanding a new venture or creative project, but finds themselves blocked in some way. I'm going to introduce myself in a bit more detail shortly, but first I'd like to introduce my co-host for today, Angie Bishop of Salient Consultancy. Angie, would you like to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Angie Bishop and I run Salient Consultancy, which partners with organisations to provide advisory support, and that's mostly related to finance, governance and leadership. Excuse me. For example, if you're looking at an investment activity such as M&A, mergers and acquisitions, or a business sale or integration, or if you need an NED or director with particular skill sets, then we can source a perfect and innovative fit for you. We also specialise in supporting organisational leadership programs, as well as working with private clients on their personal leadership development. So, for example, this could include one-to-one sessions to practice interview techniques, mentoring board directors or managers, or simply supporting an individual to obtain their next career move. Now, personally, I love to be part of growing great leadership skills. And we work with clients from students to senior execs to gain this result. In summary, we identify and set strategies or plans to eliminate barriers and fears holding back successful outcomes, which, funnily enough, is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Yeah. So, Tracy, would you like to say a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, thanks, Angie. So my name's Tracy Findlater, and I'm the Director of Training and Coaching for Sun Spiral. We're an innovation consultancy based in Kings Lynn in Norfolk, and we specialise in practical innovation. I spent 15 years working in corporate HR and training before completing a master's degree in human rights law and taking up a tutoring and mentoring role in further education. So like Angie, I'm a people-centred coach and trainer, and I've worked with students, professionals and entrepreneurs from a variety of backgrounds, helping them to develop their careers and achieve their full potential. We'll share our contact details at the end of the webinar with a little bit more information about our businesses for anyone who's interested, but we'll crack on with the topic for today. So for what we're going to be talking about, we envision covering off a few items, and I'm just going to put up a slide to outline what those are. Just bear with me 1 second. There. So what we're going to be covering up is outlined there. So we're going to be looking at developing self-awareness to recognise fears, naming and shaming and overcoming those fears. We're going to be talking a little bit about failure and what that actually means, and gaining confidence to tackle new issues. We're going to be talking a little bit about the quieter voice and how to get heard among louder voices, and the importance of developing a plan to break through barriers and fears, so bringing in sort of practical aspects. And then we're going to talk about sort of reviewing that and celebrating progress and continuous learning. So Angie, what do you see as the important outcomes for today?
Yes, I think the most important outcomes really are around identifying the fears and barriers that hold us all back, building confidence to create a plan to tackle them, actioning that plan, and then applying the lessons learned. So I guess it's the usual learning cycle: identify, learn, reflect, and apply.
Indeed. Regarding the format, we like to keep our sessions really informal and conversational as we go through. So anyone watching live should feel free to chip in with any comments or ask any questions, and we'll do our best to pick them up as we go along. So Angie, like I like to do, I'm going to start with a question to put you on the spot a little bit. What would you say are the most common barriers and fears that your clients talk to you about?
Yes, well, most clients don't come to a one-to-one session with me ready and able to name all their barriers and fears at the outset. That'd be far too easy. So mostly those sort of come out in conversation as we explore what's on their minds. and keeping them awake at night. The problem I get first is more often that it's not related that it's related to someone who listen, a director who could be, too demanding and frustrating, or like a subordinate who's just absolutely impossible to work with. So essentially, it's usually somebody else's fault. And I guess this brings in the vital element of becoming self-aware and, I hate to say it, but honest with yourself, to be able to understand and accept what part you are playing in these barriers and or fears. Working with a coach or mentor can be a start, as we always talk very openly about issues, and by asking a few searching questions, which we'll come on to later, can usually determine where the barriers or fears lie quite quickly. We often need a trusted, unbiased and experienced advisor to ask those difficult questions and explore various options in a safe environment. And I guess this can be really difficult to achieve on your own because we all have natural biases and beliefs.
That's true. It's a really good point. And I noticed this in myself, not just as a coach, but also with my own development. Sometimes the thing that feels to me to be the problem turns out to be a smokescreen or a veneer. So I'll be thinking to myself, God, my boss wouldn't let me get word edgeways in that meeting. But when I open up to myself about it, I often learn that there's probably more I could have done beforehand. So it's not really about the talkative boss trying to hijack the meeting. It's about me not having done the groundwork first. Did I prepare well enough? Did I make it clear to that boss that I actually had valid points to make during the meeting? And if I look really deep down, was I actually relieved that I didn't have to say anything in the meeting, but then turned into resentment after the fact to save face?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it all circles back to developing one's own self-awareness and self-honesty.
That's right.
It's sometimes and very often a difficult and painful journey, as no one likes admitting they have areas that they need to change or develop. But admitting this is actually the first step to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a sequence that I use in coaching that allows me to open up those questions. They're useful to ask clients, but they're equally good to help with self-reflection. I'm just going to bring that slide up. Yeah, there we go. So the questions that I've outlined, I use in sequence. What's on your mind? What's the specific challenge for you? Why is this important? And what else? And I think answering those questions honestly helps you to get to the bottom of what is actually holding you back, as opposed to what you think might be holding you back. I think the why is it important and the what else questions are what get you beneath the topic. So it's not just the potentially superficial issue of my boss who was hijacking the meeting, with that challenge of, well, it's not allowing me to utilize my potential. It allows to seeing what is important. Is it actually holding back my progress? And if so, how is it holding me back? And what can I do about it? And the what else question, that comes from Michael Bungay-Stanya's coaching model. He calls it the or question and what else. And it's outlined in his book, The Coaching Habit, which is about developing and managing a coaching culture. I'll put a link to that in the comments because it is really helpful within that context, but also in an individual context. It's a good hack to be able to ask what is really going on here.
Yeah, I really like that, because it is the what's really going on here that people can avoid confronting because we're afraid to, really. Before we go any further, I also want to ask, what is a fear? A while ago, I listened to a podcast featuring Ruth Sukop, author of the very long titled book, Do It Scared, Finding the Courage to Face Your Fears, Overcome Obstacles and Create a Life You Love. I mean, it is a very long title, to be sure. After surveying over something like about 4,000 adults, Sukop and her team found that there were 7 different ways that fear manifests itself. It's what she calls, as you can see on the slide, fear archetypes. And these include procrastinator, the rule follower, the people pleaser, the outcast, the self-doubter, the excuse maker, and the pessimist. And you can probably already see yourself in one or many of these categories. I know I could.
Yeah, it sounds like the behaviour that people sort of fall back into when they're afraid. So does everyone have a sort of specific type of behaviour when it comes to our fears?
It's a little less rigid than that. Sue Kopp explains that each of us possess a few qualities of all 7 archetypes, but most of us have at least one dominant archetype that affects us more strongly than others and plays out in our lives in more noticeable ways. When I felt I matched most closely with a procrastinator archetype, as I often do put things off that I could do immediately. But actually, rather than beating myself up over it, I actually found this information empowering. So it reminded me that by identifying what holds us back, we're better able to make the changes necessary to overcome it. We all carry fear, but accepting the type of fear you carry is, again, it's the first step to pushing past it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Definitely goes some way to starting a process of dealing with those fears. And again, we'll have to put a link in the comments to the book later on, so we don't have to write out the title each time.
Yeah.
We've got another slide that touches on some of those questions around fear. Let me just bring that up. Right, so I'm not going to go over all of those, obviously, but some of those that sort of stand out particularly are things like lack of confidence and self-belief. But I think that's really part of a bigger picture of what holds us back, isn't it? And in many ways, these issues can become interconnected and then sort of tie us up even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's also guilt tied into that.
Yeah.
Things like, am I fulfilling my potential?
Yeah.
Preventing my light shining? Am I even understanding or meeting expectations? And why am I so scared? All those questions. And I think we have to name and shame those fears to ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And there's often a lack of confidence and self-belief that prevents us from doing even that, from naming and addressing our barriers. I can remember very early on in my career, and even back at school, the idea of making a mistake was just the worst thing in the world. And I spent years hiding behind this veneer of sort of perfectionism and agreeableness, because the idea of getting in trouble was crippling. And it took a long time for me to be able to address that and then sort of move away from that view of myself, which I think so many other people struggle with as well. And growth in this area, I mean, it comes with experience, doesn't it, and self-awareness, but also perspective, meeting and talking to other like-minded people about these things.
Yes, I mean, talking to other people is a really helpful way of getting to the bottom of this. Obviously, coaching is an ideal format to do this safely, but you can also seek out mentors at work, good leaders who are able to either directly or indirectly help you. Also, don't overlook friends and family who may have experience of dealing with barriers, more barriers than you realize. So just one word of caution, though, just be careful. So you need to find unbiased people. Otherwise, they can prejudge you or the situation. And so often other people can also take over, even when they are trying to be helpful.
Yeah, sure. Which probably brings us neatly to the subject of struggling to get your voice heard. This is another issue that I know a lot of people struggle with, whether it's because they lack confidence to speak up or they're being bulldozed by so-called strong characters. I think it can often pertain to women in business, but we've probably all had times when we've not been able to comment on something for fear of being wrong or being shouted down, or simply thinking our own opinions just not worth voicing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely relate to this concept of the quieter voice, which I used to struggle with myself. And I know from experience that it's often based on peer pressure. So, feeling that you need to say exactly the right thing at exactly the right time.
Yeah.
And lack of confidence feeling you won't meet others' expectations. My boardroom and meeting experience is now pretty extensive, but in the position of a female director, I've often been shouted down by other people in the room, and sadly, often men. I say this with great respect, as it's not always the case. But in my experience, as I was often the only woman in the board meeting, it appeared to me that there was almost a sort of a wolf pack instinct against me. And it got so bad in one company that I actually resigned rather than having my confidence undermined anymore. Looking back to the sort of early 2000s, this organisation had a very male-dominated culture, and I took a mental beating. And it did take me some time to recover and feel confident in my own quiet voice again.
Yeah, that's such a good example, isn't it? As bad as it is, you know what I mean? It's a good example of the point, and it demonstrates it in a very valid way that it's not always you holding yourself back.
Exactly. I've come to value my own quiet voice, and I see it now actually as a strength. I've read that a good leader talks last, and I prefer this, as for me, it gives others the opportunity to talk, and for me to listen. It also helps to set the scene on which I can then base and voice my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in a business context, the tangible barriers that a poor culture engenders can be visible from quite clear symptoms, can't they? And we have got a slide that outlines that. Again, I'll just bring that up.
Great, thank you.
There we go. So yeah, again, I'm not going to read them all out, but I'll let people sort of have a look through them. I'm sure they will relate to them. The ones that stand out to me straight away are around staff and strategy, so that when staff feel undervalued, it's usually a symptom of a lack of ability to be heard, a lack of psychological safety to contribute ideas, a lack of clear purpose. When people aren't clear what they're supposed to be doing and what they're supposed to be aiming for, then growth and development suffer. So much when there's no business strategy, and that can cause stagnation and lack of progress, both for a business and for an individual within that business. And it's a sad fact, like with your example, Angie, if you ask any individual how to deal with an environment that maintains those barriers, they'll probably say the only real solution is leave the business.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think it's really worth making the point again that sometimes it's not you. Sometimes it's an organizational issue, and working towards change at this level can be like steering a ship around. We've got a slide to look at and clarify the circle of influence and recognize what is under your control and what is not. And I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to leave people to read through. So work-based barriers are not insurmountable, thank goodness. But in an organizational context, this usually comes down to good leadership. If you're trying to progress, good leaders need good leaders themselves to mentor and challenge them. So it is actually really important to seek out like-minded people and like-minded organizations for inspiration. So go out and seek those people who demonstrate great leadership qualities. I think reflect on them. And then you can then adopt those attitudes and behaviors yourself, and actively create opportunities to demonstrate them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking back to our last webinar, one interesting point that came up, and I think bears repeating in this context, is the lack of induction for staff getting a promotion. So you get a great induction when you first start in a company, but then nothing further. And I think it would be useful if you got an induction or even a mentor, at each stage of your career progression, as often a person's just really unprepared for a new role and doesn't fully understand the expectations on them, or perhaps these expectations, are unreasonable and need discussion and clarification to align expectation and behaviour. I think so many new managers struggle, not because they aren't up to the job, but because they don't have that support or don't feel able to seek out that support and ask for help.
Yeah, I think all organisations really do need a tested resource development plan for recruiting, developing, retaining, and improving management and leadership skills. And this lack of structure, as we've said, often results in huge expectations gap, which is itself a barrier between the organisation and the leader. Just thinking about it, I remember a particular client one-to-one I was having, and the person just simply said to me, "I don't know what's expected of me." And that sort of simple expression of frustration just showed me that there was a huge gap of communication between two people. And that seems really crazy when there are so many communication methods available.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, so Tracy, we've talked a little bit about recognizing internal fears and external barriers, and how we can appreciate and manage them realistically. How do you think we can take that forward to make real improvement?
Yeah, I think any kind of structured plan is really important. We talk a lot about strategy at Sun Spiral, and having a strategy is precisely that. It's determining the things you're going to do, and perhaps more importantly, the things that you're not going to do. And creating this kind of plan, I think, helps you to manage your fears as it puts you in control. And whether you call it a roadmap or a strategy or a plan of action, what you're doing is providing structure and a guide to moving forward. I've got another slide that I'll put up. Just bear with me.
Okay, great. Fabulous.
Yeah, lovely. So often use this to help businesses to appreciate the role of strategy. But I think it helps in a personal development context as well, as it's about recognizing the overall purpose of what you're trying to achieve, and then using a strategy to create a focus from which we can extrapolate our tactics, so the how we're going to do things. My business partner introduced us to the concept of OKRs last year. OKRs are generally used to translate business strategy, but again, they can be used at a personal level to bring clarity, focus, and structure, because it works at two levels: strategic and operational. So the objective is the what, the strategy, and the key results are the how, so the tactics, what you're doing to achieve it. There's a website called whatmatters.com, and that has a really good introduction and examples around this. And again, I'll put a link in the comments later. But I personally find that having this sort of structure is really helpful, especially if I find things getting a bit chaotic around me, which is a real barrier for me.
Yes, I think how you develop these areas is really important, and will assist in creating a positive mindset to say, well, hey, yes, I need to improve in certain areas, which are blah 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 blah, but I can control this, and create my own structured activity plan to work on these things. This in itself will help you gain confidence, as you've now taken control of your career and can make any necessary changes. You don't have to be at an organisation or anyone else's mercy or plan. Take charge of your own destiny, in short.
Yeah.
For me personally, and how I coach, is I find that once barriers and fears are identified, the next part of the progress is to create a plan to tackle them. And as a practical, sort of logical person, I work best with a defined and detailed plan, very detailed.
Yeah.
It harks back to my project management and financial training, I think, but it gives me the route map to progress, as well as the benchmarks to measure my progress. And I personally find that really motivating. And I guess it might be a bit sad, but this might just resonate with a few others. I like to plan it all out on a spreadsheet,
Okay.
a project plan, or even a Word document. In my early career, I used to create flowcharts of my plan, using Microsoft Project. But thankfully, I've moved on from there regarding getting too much detail. But I guess my point is, threefold or fourfold, really. One is to create the plan, most important step. 2 is to monitor and measure it.
Mhm.
3 is to look at the divergences to the plan. And, the last one, 4, is really change the plan or realign it to the situation.
Mm.
And it's no different to how we make our business plans or budgets or even run projects.
Yeah, I think celebrating wins is really important as well, isn't it? I mean, I'm big on
Yeah.
rewarding myself, even if it's, just a coffee and cake when I finish a webinar. Create a plan and action it, but celebrate the learning and the progress that you're making along the way. It's an ongoing process, isn't it? So it's about trying not to think of it as just a one-off, as being a binary thing, doing or not doing. Keep making those plans, keep actioning them, keep learning, diverging, if you need to, like you've said, Angie, and then celebrating the progress that you've made. I think this continual self-assessment can really help to build confidence, as it's a way of acknowledging and embedding all the progress that you're making. And then by celebrating, you're affirming and then building on that confidence, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the coffee and cake reward. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
So, yeah, so that's my favourite bit. So what about when we make those things? We make lots of plans and they don't work. Is it
Mm.
appropriate at this point to talk about failure?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, failure is very subjective, isn't it? And it's
Yeah,
often
it is.
based on perceptions rather than facts. I think we're always supposed to say these days that failure is a positive thing, but in my gut, I think that always sits a little bit false. I think that in hindsight, failure can be a positive thing, and I've certainly dodged bullets in the past by not being able to
Mm,
attain things that I look back on now and think, God, thank God for that. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt at the time or I didn't feel let
mm,
down. And I think we can sometimes be embarrassed, can't we? Especially when we've made the effort to reach out for something and missed. And I think, as with anything, it's about trying to be objective, a little bit stoical, and thinking, okay, that didn't work, and I'm not very happy about it. But what happens next? What can I do next? As an example from my own experience, I do a lot of creative writing, and I was recently turned down for a funding opportunity. I tried really hard not to think I was relying on it, but deep down, I had my fingers crossed, my toes crossed, everything crossed. And then when I didn't get it, it still really hurt. So I sort of built a picture up of what it was going to be like, when I got that thing, and then that life didn't happen, and you feel sad. But after a while, I looked back at my application and I thought, you know what, it would actually look much better if I did this way, and I looked at it again more objectively. So it's about using failure and rejection as feedback, which is a topic we're going to talk later about, I think, in a later webinar. Um, I'd never be one of those people who pushes the idea of celebrating failure. That feels a little bit disingenuous to me, but I think sulk a bit, get over it, and learn from it. What's your take on failure, Angie?
Well, I'm a very practical fact checker, which is common
Yeah,
in the finance world.
yeah.
So that's usually what I suggest, that you look from a kind of non-judgmental, unemotional perspective, if you can.
Mm,
I remember wanting to have
yeah.
a conversation with a superior a long time ago about why I thought I deserved promotion. I practiced the conversation over and over and over again in my head, and then I convinced myself of how badly this conversation would go. Was on the verge of, I guess, abandoning.
All right.
Um, I then asked some advice from someone who said, "Well, even if you think you know where the conversation will go, have it anyway, as it may play out differently. And essentially, what have you got to lose?"
Mm,
I was kind of skeptical, which looking back was probably mostly due to lack of confidence.
mm-hmm.
Plus, I thought I knew best in those days,
Ah,
long
too young.
ago. Um, but, I, but I had the nation anyway. And actually, to
Mhm,
my surprise and utter delight, it turned out completely opposite to how I thought it would.
mm, mm,
Um, so yeah, I guess the three things I learned were: one, stop trying to second guess what others might say or think, even. Um, two, have the courage to have those difficult conversations.
Mhm.
And lastly, don't look at things in terms of success or failure. That's kind of a linear and black
Yeah.
and white perspective. My initial sense of failure was based on what I believed in my head, not fact. So
Yeah.
by creating an opportunity to fact check, i.e. having the chat and asking questions, I dissolved the imaginary failure and created an actual successful outcome, and got the promotion.
Well done.
Coffee and cake.
Hey.
But in effect, I was going to say, in effect, though, there was nothing to lose and absolutely everything to gain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's often the fear of failure that keeps us from trying, because we're scared of a potential failure when we actually have no idea how something might play out. We just assume the worst. I think you've got to think of it as giving yourself permission to try something, even if you're not sure how it's going to go. I looked into this for an article I wrote last year, and I read about the work of psychologist Carol Dweck, and she did a study in the 90s about how effort was rewarded. I'm not sure if you know of the study.
Yeah, I do.
But yeah, she took two groups of children and gave them mathematics problems to solve, and they were praised either for their effort, so you tried really hard, or for their ability, you're so clever. And the children who were given effort-based praise were more likely to keep working out new approaches as the problems became more complex. But the children who were praised for their natural ability then tended to choose tasks that confirmed what they already knew, so they became less resilient and more concerned with failure. It's really interesting, isn't it? I think it does bear out in reality how quickly we can lose our appetite for risk.
Yeah, that's right. We stay safe when in fact success can't come really without challenging ourselves and getting out our comfort zone, I guess it's called. And I'm not talking about sort of high risks like skydiving or bungee jumping or such, but using our planning to incrementally move us out of what's comfortable.
Yes.
Go arrange that chat with the head of department about promotion. Sign up for that course on presentation skills. Be prepared, really to get a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, and then reward yourself, coffee and cake, when you've achieved the next step.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that seems like a really good point to end on. I think the idea of conquering those imaginary fears. We're coming sort of to the end of our time now. We've gone a tiny little bit over, but not to worry. As ever, we'd love to invite anyone who's interested to explore and learn more on how to recognise and overcome barriers to get in touch with us. So if anyone watching either live or on catch up at any point would like to explore and clarify their own concerns, or understand how to grow that self-awareness, or get individualised methods to overcome barriers and fears, please do get in touch with us. Angie, perhaps this is a good point if you want to say a little bit more about what you do, in case anyone out there might think it's a good fit for them.
Yeah, and I guess essentially I love career coaching and mentoring professionals looking to improve personal performance and leadership skills, and that can include boards or senior management teams. And often this involves, what we talked about today, really identifying those barriers to success, setting goals, and then having some achievable steps. Salient, we have a sort of holistic approach as well to finding potential business value and success by using an ESG lens. So that's sort of looking at our environmental, social, and governance issues. And these principles add value to any organization, any individual, and the wider environment.
Great.
So, just looking at the time, just to end off, we offer a free basic business health check for organizations and a free introductory chat for individuals, where, for sort of 30, 40 minutes, we can explore your challenges and aspirations and discuss how we can support you.
Lovely. Thanks, Angie. Just to give a little bit of information about what we do at Sunspiral, we work with businesses to identify their biggest barriers and bring viable, innovative solutions. Our focus is on working with people in the geoscience, environmental and social enterprise fields. And we're all about practical innovation as a means of making things work better. So whether that's creating a better product, a better service, or a better environment. My personal areas of interest and expertise are coaching, creativity, and workplace culture. And my business partner, Ben, who I mentioned in relation to OKRs earlier, he has a focus on innovation management frameworks and go-to-market strategy. So if anything in there sounds interesting, then please get in touch with us. Just before I hand over to Angie to finish up, I'd like to say thanks again for joining us today. The recording of this stream will continue to be available as a post on LinkedIn. We'll check the comments to see if anyone has any questions, and we'll link our contact details and links to the resources that we mentioned as well.
Thanks, Tracy. Yes, and just to say thanks to everyone watching, and to appreciate that each person is on their own journey. If you feel you need some support with that journey, we're here and we'd love to help. And we're available to answer any questions you might have. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. Just lastly then, it's been an absolute pleasure for both of us to share our knowledge today, and we hope it's added a bit of insight for you. So thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.